John A. Power, or Powers, known as Jack, was born in 1827 to an Irish family that emigrated to the United States in 1836 and settled in the rough streets of Hell's Kitchen, New York City. In 1846, at 19, Jack volunteered with his older brother Edward to serve in Company G of the 1st Regiment of New York Volunteers. He and his friends and other family members would fight in the Mexican-American War on a mission by Colonel Jonathan D. Stevenson to seize California. The reward was that each soldier was entitled to land if successful. While in San Francisco, Jack and his brother moved to Company F, which was stationed in Santa Barbara. Most of the action was farther south in the Baja, as a treaty was signed releasing Alta or Upper California, leading the soldiers to disband the garrison in September of 1848. Shortly before this, James W. Marshall found gold in the lumber mill he was constructing for John Sutter, sparking another type of conflict. The date was January 24, 1848, and the place was Sutter's Mill. Officially, the Mexican-American War ended on May 30th with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, and California became entirely part of the United States. Jack gambled the rest of the year before setting off into the goldfields with his regiment. He spent time in San Francisco, continued his ways, and aligned with the San Francisco Society of Regulators. He was also rumored to be in cahoots with a criminal gang called the Hounds. This led to his arrest after a violent attack on a Chilean settlement, but Jack was found not guilty and left for mining interests. In August, Jack traveled to Stockton, where he mined over $10,000 and used it in gambling, acquiring upwards of $50,000. Initially, he planned to take several steamships back to New York to care for his widowed mother, but compulsion left his fortune depleted, and Jack once again settled in San Francisco around 1850. Here he became a regular socialite, gambling at the Mission Dolores Resort and mastering horsemanship. No matter how low the states of his finances, he was never without a good horse. It had, however, this striking peculiarity that it would never gallop straight forward towards any given point, but would advance in a sort of sidelong canter. Very pleasing to behold, but requiring great skill on the part of the rider to maintain his seat. In this eccentric movement of the animal, Power took great delight, for it afforded him opportunities to display his superior horsemanship. Jack was also an accomplished banjo player and was known to give concerts in the gambling house. By 1851, Jack had traveled back and forth between L.A., Santa Barbara, and San Francisco, gambling, horse racing, and attending social gatherings, one of which had nearly cost him his life. He's said to have insulted some young ladies of a well-known California family, and after taking the argument outside, was stabbed several times. He managed to escape and recover, but vowed to give up his fast life. The following year, he built a ranch to raise pigs on the Arroyo del Barro lands, once part of Mission Santa Barbara. Located in the present-day San Roque neighborhood, he believed he had rights to the property because he was in Company G of Stevenson's regiment. However, Richard S. Den and Daniel Hill claimed to have leased the land from the mission and provided a 1846 grant of ownership from the last Mexican governor. The challenge would go to the courts. On June 10, 1851, it was reported Jack led a small posse against a group of Native Americans from the San Joaquin Valley that were focused only on trade. Still, allegations about the town had some of them rustling horses. The posse captured two of the groups that were responsible for the crimes and retrieved the horses. According to accounts, they were hardened criminals who had murdered a peddler and escaped the Santa Barbara jail. In July 1852, Jack took another bounty for outlaws Doritio Zabalita, a Californio, and Jesus Rivas, a Sonoran. Jack was undoubtedly popular among the European American settlers, but his favor was not enough to see the loss of his land in both state and federal courts. Jack said he would not leave without force and took a body of men to protect it. On April 20th, 1853, an old compatriot, Sheriff W. W. Twist, waited outside the Presidio Center for Jack and promptly handed him a court order to evict him from the Arroyo del Barro. Jack replied, "I'll stay as long as the boys stick with me, and even if the house is burnt over me, you can do nothing." An agitated Twist asked all able-bodied men to meet him on April 30th at his home at the Aguiar House on Carrillo Street in Anacapa at 10 a.m. Word made it to Jack, who countered by holding a community feast at the house in honor of all those who assembled. He hired musicians and arranged for ladies to dance, as well as food catered by merchant Theodore Smith. Jack also secretly drew up a deed at the Santa Barbara courthouse to transfer the Arroyo del Barro to his friend and agent Patrick Dunn for $1, thinking this might save the property. The day before the party, the merchant and Jack were loading a wagon with beef and pork when Francisco Badillo nosed in to ask Jack if he meant to cause any trouble. Jack assured them there would be none, but rather a pleasant dinner and wine. Badillo happily pitched in $2 to help fund the musicians. On the morning of April 30th, Twist awaited on his veranda for his 200-plus posse to arrive. Among them were Badillo, Esteban Ortega, and a young man named Alejo Leiva, who claimed to have been summoned from Los Angeles. Jack, who had different intentions, came early and challenged Twist over a game of chess. With the winner, he proposed to keep the Arroyo del Barro. It didn't go as planned, and an argument left Jack hurrying back to fetch the so-called party wagons. However, the posse, with very few arms, nervously spread across the front yard, and one asked about preparing the nearby cannon for more support. But as they did, 3 of Jack's gang approached on horseback with John Vidal riding in front and saying, "What kind of damn sheriff are you anyway? You'd better make your will. You will get a bullet through your head this day." Twist answered back, "The bullet was not made to kill me this day." Jack's men, Vidal, Horatio Robinson, and John Dunn, began gleefully jumping their horses over the cannon, with Vidal stopping momentarily to greet a pretty young woman who watched from the house before he leapt back over the cannon. Twist shouted, "Do not ridicule the cannon." Meanwhile, a few drunkards and squatters involved themselves in the chaos. In a short time, Vidal paraded the cannon around by a lasso, which was cut loose by Twist only to be lassoed again. Vidal raised his gun and fired at Twist, who was just trying to manage things, when Robinson, too, suddenly charged on his horse, shooting wildly. The next few seconds saw 25 shots fired, and the dust settled over the dead body of Vidal and another, with several injured, including Dunn, who was bullet-ridden but crawling away. Robinson was able to part the crowd and escape. Suddenly, Twist, thinking it was over, was stabbed in the back by the boy Alejo. Twist fell in agony but blasted the boy, who made it another 3 blocks before dying near Ortega Street. Unknown to Twist, Alejo was a cousin of the woman whom Vidal greeted, and this in turn was likely also Vidal's girlfriend. When Jack returned, he was met by a force larger than his own and was chased back to his ranch. There he hunkered down with his pal James Lynch among others. A standoff ensued, and not surprisingly, Jack was captured but acquitted, as he gambled his ranch for his life and leased to harvest his crops and collect his things. Jack carried on, leasing a part of Rancho Laguna in the Guadalupe Valley and selling his pigs to return to the fast life. In 1856, while Jack was residing in Santa Barbara, fellow Irishman Ned McGowan sought him out to evade an execution squad called the Committee of Vigilance. This group was formed when Ned, who was running a gambling house inside a brothel, was appointed judge by a friend named David Broderick, who was part of a political pressure group called the Boys. A rash of arson throughout San Francisco, newspapers pointing fingers at merchants looking to turn unsold cheap goods into insurance claims. This untamed anger for justice led to the creation of the San Francisco Committee of Vigilance, which would take the law into its own hands. At the heart of this was editor James King of the Evening Bulletin, a twice-failed banker who had a personal vendetta list. While Ned and other judges armed the group, several on and off again uprisings followed King's word in the newspapers. In the spring of 1856, King wrote of James Casey, a city council member and editor for a rival newspaper. But when Casey was harassed, he replied by shooting King, and thus the Second Vigilance Committee was formed. The streets would be policed by the Vigilantes for the next 3 months, and Casey was hanged on May 22nd. The Vigilantes would banish over 500 men or risk death, including Ned McGowan, who was a friend of Casey and rumored to have supplied him with the gun. McGowan and Jack were dining in a hotel near De La Guerra Plaza when Sheriff James Russell Heath was alerted. Jack hurried McGowan into the Casa de la Guerra across the street. When the Vigilantes gathered, Jack said he saw he fled to the De La Guerra Gardens, but the crowd arrived and fired into the Tuiles to find nothing but smoke. Jack had rolled McGowan into a rug and carried him out while making some excuse for it being dirty. In appreciation, Ned wrote highly of Jack in his book, detailing the ordeal and giving him the moniker the Notorious. Yet outing him this way also brought accusations against Jack. In 1857, the Los Angeles Vigilantes, a gang that would later be called the Flores-Daniel Gang, proliferated that Jack was head of a crime ring plaguing the city. It was known that Jack gambled and raced horses, but with notoriety, a warrant would undoubtedly go out for his arrest. The sheriff arrested Jack in Santa Barbara, and after calling a lawyer named Eugene Lies, he demanded Lies transfer him to his care. Under pressure, the judge allowed this questionable plan, but Jack escaped both the lawyer and the court. Dishonored, Lies provided a collection for his arrest, and eventually Jack was extradited to Los Angeles, where he faced a judge who was no longer on the thumb of the Vigilantes. The conviction was dismissed for lack of evidence. On May 2, 1858, Jack rode in what was hailed the Great Match Against Time, an event held at the Pioneer Racecourse just south of San Francisco. The crowd watched Jack race his horses over 150 miles at 6 hours and 43 minutes. A record feat the paper wrote, as the farthest any horse was ridden at a time was 4 miles, and the least distance was 1 mile. He ran at top speed the whole time. On taking a new horse, he would spring from the saddle, run a few steps to stretch his legs, and immediately vaulted into the saddle of the animal that awaited him. Attendees sometimes made the rounds with him, tendering him drink and receiving his orders. Later that month, Jack was again under the watch of the San Luis Obispo Vigilantes. They claimed Jack was working with the Pio Linares gang, which was disrupting the cattle trade, lying in wait for travelers and robbing their money and cattle. It is assumed that some of the vaqueros participated in the trade. While the cattle owners rode at night, the vaqueros would create a stampede that left chaos and easy targets for the gang. Jack was said to have as many as 80 men with him. Jack was never caught through a quick getaway until one day 2 French cattlemen were driving their herd on the Burton Mesa. Jack was said to be posing as a sheriff with the posse and ordered the cattlemen to drop their guns. Faking an arrest for cattle stealing, one of the accused shot Jack in the leg, downing his horse. The 2 fled through Pine Canyon toward Rancho La Persima, but were killed at the Santa Ynez River. In the evening, Jack saw a doctor for what he explained was a badly infected boil. News got around that the cattlemen were murdered, and Jack's involvement was revealed by one of the bandits, Jose Antonio Garcia. The vigilantes pursued and hanged the gang members, with Jack and his friend Monea using as relay horses to escape to Mexico. The vigilantes charged Jack with being their leader, with crimes going back to 1853. But around this time, untold robberies and murders happened along the stretch of the El Camino Real, making it a notably dangerous route. On May 31st, 1858, Governor John B. Weller issued rewards for the gang members at large. Jack Powers, Pio Linares, and El Hero, among others. Jack had a bounty of $500 on his head. Newspapers followed Jack, who was reportedly seen in Lower California by June 3rd. Meanwhile, several days later, when Jack was spotted in Mexico, Garcia, who was kept in jail only for the sake of trying Jack, was hung by the vigilantes. On October 9th, a Los Angeles newspaper reported that Jack was living well in Hermosillo, Mexico, and told the reporters he'd be back in San Francisco in due time to face his enemies. By June of the next year, he had opened a hotel and was active in the community and an aid for Americans traveling through the area. In late September of 1860, the newspaper wrote he purchased a ranch near Tucson and was in the brick-making business for the local fort. In reality, he had been gambling and running a ranch in Sonora, and Jack was informed of a buyer in New Mexico territory, but after arriving with his herd and forced laborers, some of whom were yaqui, they found no buyer. Jack also saw dwindling personnel due to confrontations with Apache on their trek, with only 4 laborers and possibly his friend Monea staying with him. They went to Potrero Ranch in Arizona, occupied a Montgomery and Smith. Jack and his men built a home close to them to watch their herd. On October 26, 1860, Montgomery and Smith rode to Jack to ask if their hogs were on his property. Jack affirmed this and invited them to stay the night, saying they would likely come out of the Tules by morning. But Montgomery and Smith declined and instead arrived the next day to find several hogs at the house surrounding a mangled body. On closer inspection, Jack had been the victim of a cut to his throat and a cracked skull. It was later revealed that either the workers had enough of Jack and rode off with some of their things, or another account had Jack and Monea killing each other in a knife fight over the affections of a Spanish señorita. Jack was buried in Tumacacori Mission Cemetery in Santa Cruz County, southern Arizona. This has been Biographies of the West. My name is Lorin Morgan-Richards. Thanks for watching.